A rough old voice pulled the boy back to his senses. When he looked around, he found himself standing on a magic circle inside a royal hall. A crowned middle-aged man told him this place was Letitia, a different world, and that the land was close to ruin because of the dark being king. Then the king calmly said the kingdom had summoned a hero to defeat that dark being king. The boy was still dizzy, but he understood one thing right away. They had dragged him into another world and wanted to use him. Then his memories came back as the truth rushed into his head. One man near the king yelled at him for being disrespectful. The boy looked up and saw a black-robed mage holding a staff with a red gem rue. The moment he saw him, all confusion vanished. The last words from his previous life rang in his head. He was no longer needed as the hero. He instantly charged forward and punched Ryu before anyone could stop him. Ryu crashed into the wall and lost consciousness, but the boy did not stop there. He climbed on top of him and kept hitting him while screaming his name. Guards rushed in and dragged it away, but he still struggled and shouted that Ryu would never escape what he had done. Then he was struck from behind and began to lose consciousness. He thought of the truth. Ryu had killed him. This was not his first summoning to Letitia. Just moments earlier in his previous life, he had fought as the hero to save the world, but at the end, the people he trusted most betrayed him. His right arm was cut off, he was badly injured, and his own companions laughed while he collapsed. Ryu was one of them. They wanted the glory of defeating the dark being king for themselves. Once the war was nearly over, they decided the hero had become a burden, so they killed him. Yet somehow he was alive again. He did not know why he had returned, but he accepted this second chance with gratitude. This time, he would make every betrayer regret what they had done. During his time in the cell, he learned that Ryu had not been seriously hurt and had claimed he took no offense. The kingdom was treating the attack as a shock-driven outburst. They could not summon a hero and punish him too harshly right away. Still, the boy admitted to himself that attacking Ryu so quickly had been reckless. He had acted before understanding the full situation. Even so, he could not truly regret it. Ryu had murdered him, then he tested his power and found something was terribly wrong. He could release only a little magic, but he could no longer form proper. Most of the hero's power was gone. His body had also changed. He was smaller, weaker, and younger again. Even his hair was different. That was why no one recognized him as the former hero. Even so, not everything was lost. He still had the knowledge, skills, and battle experience from his past life. Against normal knights, he could still manage as he sat there. He looked back on how everything had started 3 years earlier. Back then, he had been living an ordinary life at home. When he was suddenly summoned to Letitia, he woken up, and the king explained that the world was under threat from the dark being king. The hero they had called was him. When asked for his name, he stumbled over his words and only managed to say, Matsuko. So everyone began calling him that. The king quickly asked him to save the world, but he refused. He was only 16 and had never wanted a life of fighting. After losing his parents in an accident, he had simply drifted through life and lived with his uncle. But this was too much. He wanted to go home. The king then said returning home would take years. He also warned that the kingdom might fall before then. In simple terms, if Matsu wanted to go back, he first had to fight. The king let him stay in the castle, but Matsu saw through it. They were not being. The king let him stay in the castle, but Matsu saw through it. They were not being kind. They were pressuring him into obedience. He remained in his room and refused to take part, which made many people mock him as a coward. Then the situation changed. A radical group attacked his room and tried to kill him because he refused to fight. He survived only because a woman passing by stepped in and saved him. The castle should have been protected by regular night patrols, yet on that exact day the patrol failed. Later, the attackers and the negligent knights were punished. Then the king made the real meaning clear. If Matsu kept refusing, similar things could happen again. The attack had been allowed on purpose. He would be sent home, since the human side might not even last 3 more years. The message was obvious. Fight the dark being king or lose every chance of returning. So he gave in and accepted the role. The moment he did, the crest on his arm granted him tremendous magic and superhuman physical ability. As he fought, his body changed. Within 3 months, he barely looked like the same boy. Soon the world began calling him Hero Matsu. At first, he fought only because he wanted to go home. But about half a year later, that began to change. One of his earliest companions was Ryu, a mage who said he wanted to build a better F for his little sister. Another was Donnie's, a young, only man who wanted to protect his people and lead them forward. Their conviction slowly changed Matsu, who had always lived without strong purpose. Then there was Lucy, the woman who had once saved him in the castle. Her village had been destroyed by war, and her parents had died because of it. She dreamed of building a world where humans, dark being and demi-humans could live together in peace. She said she believed that world could be built if she stood beside him. Lucy supported him again and again. She encouraged him when he nearly broke, reminded him of his strength, and stayed steady through hardship. Over time, Matsu grew close to her as the journey continued. He saw the suffering caused by war on all sides. Because of that, he truly came to believe in the peaceful future Lucy had dreamed of. The road was harsh. Even with the hero's power, he nearly died. The road was harsh even with the hero's power. He nearly died many times, and Lucy stayed beside him. With support from the kingdom and other nations, they pushed the dark being king's forces back and slowly moved the war in humanity's favor. After 3 years, only the final battle remained. Matsu and his party had already cleared the enemy labyrinths and defeated the 4 heavenly kings. Now, only the Dark Being King was left. Supported by several nations, they entered the Dark Being King's castle. Their plan was simple. Matsu and Lucy would hold the front. Donas would support them. Ryu would preserve his strength until the end and finish the Dark Being King with a decisive spell. After fighting through traps, they reached the deepest chamber before the rest of the human army could catch up. There, one person stood before them. She was a small silver-haired girl with golden eyes and overwhelming magic. He had fought her before many times, but only now did she finally give her name, Elphys. Matsu answered with his own name, and the battle began. She was incredibly strong, even this party, which had already overcome so much, struggled. Magic shattered the room and cracked the floor. At last, after a brutal fight, she dropped to one knee and quietly admitted defeat. Matsu raised his sword to finish her. Then she said she had only wanted to stop the fighting. That one sentence made him hesitate. He had fought her before, and she had never seemed like someone who enjoyed killing. For a moment, he questioned whether he truly had to kill her, just because she stood on the other side. His companions shouted at him to end it. He hesitated. That was when everything collapsed. Sudden strike from behind severed his right arm. He stared in shock as it fell. The pain was overwhelming, and he felt the hero's power leaving him. He said the hero had already served his purpose. They had only needed to weaken the Dark Being King and bring the battle this far. The power in the hero's arm would be enough for Ryu to finish the rest himself. Before Matsu could recover, another spell pierced his chest. This time it came from Donnie's. Matsu could not understand it. These were the men who had fought beside him for years. Yet both of them stood there smiling while he collabed. Ryu explained their plan. Then the remaining 3 would defeat the Dark Being King, return as the true victor. Victors and claim all the glory. They no longer needed him. Donas added that enough power could still be transferred to Ryu, even if the hero died. Broken and unable to believe it, Matsu fell to the floor. For 3 years he had trusted them. Still, there was one person left he wanted to believe in. Lucy, he called her name. She smiled gently, just as always. Matsu reminded her of their promise to build a peaceful world together once the war ended. Lucy laughed. With cold eyes she told him he had been foolish. He was only an outsider from another world. It was arrogant for him to think he could save theirs. That was the moment his heart truly broke. The 3 people he trusted most mocked him together. To them, he had always been nothing more than a tool. Ryu said they had already taken all the power they needed. Then he ordered Lucy to finish him. Lucy raised her magic-covered sword. Matsu's legs could still move slightly, but his spirit was already shattered. With a final farewell to Hiramatsu, she struck and blasted him through the wall of the Dark Being King's castle. He fell outside. By then he barely felt pain. Only betrayal remained, he wondered. Only betrayal remained. Had been a mistake, but he could no longer find an answer. Filled with hatred and despair, he heard the final impact below. Then everything went dark. That was how his first summoning ended, with betrayal and death. The king's request after the second summoning was simple. He wanted Matsu to act as the hero and defeat the Dark Being King. In return, the kingdom promised to give him whatever he needed to live comfortably. This treatment was much better than the first time, which showed how desperate the kingdom had become. When Matsu asked if he could return to his world, the king said not yet. The summoning had used too much magic, so sending him back would take 6 years. Matsu almost laughed. Last time they had promised 4 years, now it was 6. That alone proved the king's promises meant very little. Even so, Matsu bowed and said he would fight as the hero. He was lying. For now, pretending to obey was the easiest way to gain freedom. The more room he had to move, the easier it would be to kill right. More importantly, he still needed information. The king was not the same man as before, so time had clearly passed. Before leaving, the king asked his name. This time he did not use Matsu. He gave his real name. From the next day on, the kingdom forced him into a strict daily routine. In the morning, he studied the world. In the afternoon, knights taught him tactics. At night, majors taught him magic. Meals and breaks were fitted in between. To Shin, most of it was useless. The knights were inefficient and the magic lessons were poorly handled. Compared to the people from his own time, the current knights and mages were less skilled. But he had to hide that knowledge and act like everything was new because of the incident with Ryu. He was still being watched closely, so he continued acting like an obedient hero while waiting for their guard to drop. Days passed. By then, the watch on him had loosened a little, especially at night. After finishing his daily schedule, he began sneaking into the library. There he searched through books about the former hero Matsu. That was where he learned the truth. 30 years had passed since his betrayal. The shock was huge, but it explained why the king had changed and why Ryu looked older. Then he discovered something even more absurd. The Dark Being King, Ortega, was still alive. Ryu and the others had murdered him while claiming they no longer needed him because they could finish the Dark Being King without him. Yet they had failed. Ortega had survived and spent the last 30 years recovering strength. Then the Dark Being King's castle. That was why the kingdom had panicked and summoned another hero. The royal records were full of stories about Hiromatsu and the Dark Being King, but most of them were lies. According to the books, Hiromatsu had died to the Dark Being King and never even reached the final chamber. But what stood out even more was this: there was no trace of Lucy or Donas anywhere. Their names had vanished from history as if they had never been part of his journey. That made no sense. If they had simply died, records of them should still remain, yet there was nothing. Lucy, who had once served in the kingdom's night order, was also completely gone from the castle. Shin realized he would need to investigate further. When he finally left the library, he took the long way back on purpose so he could memorize the updated castle layout. Some parts had changed over the last 30 years. As he walked, the guards and servants greeted him politely, but behind those manners, he could feel their contempt. His weak magic and his attack. Ryu called the new hero useless, and said someone that weak would quickly die against the Dark Being King's forces. Another mage asked what the former hero Matsu had been like, where Ryu answered shamelessly. He praised Matsu as a brave man who believed in peace like a true hero. He even acted as if he regretted what had happened. But listening outside the room, Shin was reminded again what kind of man Ryu truly was. Then Ryu added that even a useless hero could still be useful. Shin swallowed his anger, returned to his room, and waited. One more week has passed, then he finally decided to move. At 2 in the morning, the castle was nearly silent. A lone knight walked through the dark halls carrying a lamp. Ever since the kingdom had spent so much magic summoning the hero, they had reduced lighting to save power. At night, the castle was mostly dark, except for the patrol lamps. As the knight walked, he muttered complaints. He hated night patrol and doomed the kingdom for waste. Then he made a cruel joke that someone should just kill the weak boy, take the hero's power, and summon another one. At that moment, he heard a small sound behind him. He turned with one hand on his sword and raised the lamp, but saw no one. Then he noticed a small stone on the floor. As soon as he bent down to inspect it, something hard struck the back of his head. His armor had a weak protection spell, so the first hit did not fully knock him out. He turned and swung wildly, but his attacker moved cleanly, took the sword almost at once and struck him again with the hilt. A second blow landed, and this time his vision went dark. Just before he lost consciousness, he saw the face of the attacker. It was Shined. The same hero he had mocked stood over him with an icy expression. After dragging the unconscious guard into his room, Shin quietly caught his breath. His first strike had not worked as cleanly as expected, because his current strength was still lower than before, and the knight's armor had also helped. Still, the ambush had succeeded. Now he had what he needed, a sword. He tested it with a few quiet swings. It was an ordinary knight's weapon, though it carried some magic, good enough. More than 2 weeks had passed since his arrival in the castle. In that time, he had memorized the library's useful information, the castle structure, the patrol route, and the number of guards. By acting weak, harm, and obedient, he had lowered everyone's suspicion. Now it was time to move. He left his room and headed for Ryu's magic workshop. That was where Ryu would be. Inside the workshop, Ryu was already in a terrible mood. Even though his injuries from the summoning day had been healed, he still could not forget being beaten unconscious by the new hero, soon after that incident. He had even suggested using slave magic on Shin to force him into obedience, but the king had refused and chosen to observe the boy longer. That answer had only annoyed him more. What frustrated Ryu most was that the new hero had almost no magic. Such a hero was useless on the battlefield, and damaging to Ryu's own image. Still, one thing interested him. The hero's crest was real. Even if Shin himself was weak, the crest held a huge amount of power. Ryu had once stolen power from a hero before, and he had kept researching better ways to do it. If he could take Shin's arm and harvest that magic, he could still benefit greatly. That was when the workshop door opened. Ryu looked up and froze. Mitsuki Shin had entered on his own. Ryu immediately told him to leave. This was a royal workshop, not a place the hero could enter freely, but instead of listening. Shin laughed and said it was absurd hearing Ryu speak so politely. Ryu grew irritated while glaring. He secretly gathered magic behind his back and prepared a capture spell. He planned to bind Shin on the spot. Then Shin spoke again. He asked if Ryu planned to kill him the same way he had killed Matsu. For a brief moment, Ryu froze. That was knowledge Shin should not have had. That one moment of shock decided everything. Shin moved first. He burst forward with frightening speed. Ryu fired a lightning spell meant to paralyze him, but his aim slipped because he had been shaken. Shin avoided it smoothly and closed the distance at once. Ryu tried to switch to a lethal spell, but he was too late. A sword flashed. A deep injury opened in his arm. Another strike cut into his shoulder. His robe had strong defensive magic, but not enough to block the damage. Pain tore through him, and he screamed. The workshop was soundproof, so no one outside could hear. Shin pulled the blade free and pointed it at Ryu's throat. Then, in a cold voice, he said Ryu still had the same weakness as before. Whenever he was shaken, his aim would slip. Ryu stared at him in disbelief. The face was different. The age was wrong, but the hatred, the presence, and the words were too familiar. Then Shin revealed the truth. He told Ryu exactly who he was. He was Matsu. With a sword at his throat, he looked at Shin like he had seen a ghost. He kept saying it was impossible. He demanded to know why Matsu was alive, and why he now looked like a different person. Shin did not waste words. He drove the sword into him again. Even then, the blade still did not go in as deeply as it should have. Ryu's robe was protected by powerful magic still. The pain made him cry out and beg for mercy. Then Ryu tried to save himself with words. He claimed Donis and Lucy had approached him a few days before the final battle in the Dark Being King's castle. According to him, they were the ones who first proposed killing Matsu after the fight was over. They promised him the glory of killing the Dark Being King if he joined them. He stopped and listened. Ryu insisted it was true. He also said other people had joined them. Several demi-humans from the Allied support side had Cooper. These were the same people who had once praised Shin's ideals and said they wanted to help him build a peaceful future. Shin remembered every one of them. That made it worse. Those smiling allies had thrown him away for rank and reward, where you continued. During the final battle, those collaborators disguised themselves as the Dark Being King's troops and blocked the human reinforcements from entering the castle. That was why no one came to help. After that, everything happened exactly as Shin remembered. Ro cut off his arm. They planned to use the hero's power, kill the weakened Dark Being King, and erase Shin as well. Then Ru revealed something else. He said Donis and Lucy had been spies for the Dark Being King from the beginning, according to him. After Shin was brought down, Donis turned on Ru too, where you even showed an old ugly injury on his arm, and claimed Donis had given it to him back then. He said he would have been killed as well, but Lucy stopped Donnie's because someone needed to return to the humans and tell the story. So Ryu survived. He ran back to the kingdom and reported that Lucy and Donis had betrayed them and killed Hiramatsu. Of course, he left out his own betrayal. That sounded exactly like the kind of lie. When Shin asked where Lucy, Donis, and the others were now, Ryu gave an answer. He said Lucy and Donis had joined the Dark Being King's side. He also said the Oni had followed them, while the Wolf tribe had been abandoned, and was now living in a hot spring city under Allied control. That explained why so many names had vanished from the records. If the kingdom wanted to hide the fact that a royal knight and trusted allies had betrayed the hero, erasing them from history would be the easiest way, even if Ryu had later been deceived too. One fact had not changed, he still betrayed Shin. So when Ru desperately offered to work together and suggested they kill Lucy, Donis, and even the Dark Being King, Shin rejected him immediately. He cut him again. The robe reduced the damage, but the meaning was clear. There would be no forgiveness. Then Shin ordered Ryu to tell him how to break the seals on the ritual chamber and the royal treasury. Both places were locked by magic, and without the right words or stronger magic, they could not be opened under the threat of the sword. Ryu revealed the methods. After that, Shin asked if their shared dream had been a joke from the start. They had fought believing they all wanted the same world where different races could live together in peace. Wanted to know if they had been mocking that dream all along. After you said he had never believed that dream could come true, even if the Dark Being King had fallen. Here, humans had no intention of living peacefully with Dark Being. Those who resisted would be destroyed. Those who surrendered would be turned into servants. That was the future waiting at the end of the war. Hearing that, Shin finally let go of the last piece of his old hope. He was not just disappointed in them, was disappointed in himself for trusting them. At that point, Ru mentioned there was something important connected to Lucy and the other, hidden in a shelf at the back of the workshop. He also claimed that with time that realized Matsu had been right. He said he regretted killing him. He said he wanted to help him escape the kingdom and make up for what he had done. Shin let him walk to the shelf while keeping the sword on him. Ryu kept talking in a shaky voice. He swore he had changed, and in the moment he turned around, he attacked. He had coated his hand in sharp magic and tried to strike Shin down at close range. What Shin had expected, he had already positioned himself so he could dodge at once. He slipped aside cleanly, just as he had done in real battle. For Yu was still a powerful mage, but close combat had never been his strength. Now older and already injured, he was even slower. Shin told him he had not changed at all. Then, just as she moved to finish him, Ryu threw open his robe. Inside it was a glowing red crest of magic. You revealed that if he died, the spell linked to the robe would explode and blow apart the whole area, but everyone in the castle nearby would die too. Sneered and said Shin was still too soft to kill him if innocent people would be caught in the blast. Feeling safe again, where you left and moved closer. He even pushed his neck forward as if daring Shin to strike. He thought he had won and answered with a kick. His foot smashed into Ryu's face hard enough to break bone. Ryu flew backward, crashed through the high ventilation window, and dropped into the night screaming. The workshop went silent. No explosion came. Shin already knew why. That fall would not kill you, not yet, even weakened by age. Ryu had once been one of the strongest mages in the world. His robe was still protecting him too. That trick would injure him badly, but it would not finish him. Click his tongue. As long as that robe existed, kill. Relling Ryu carelessly was impossible. Right now, even in a direct fight, he was not strong enough to kill him cleanly. He needed his old power back, then he would take revenge on all of them. With that decision made, Shin left the workshop before leaving. He prepared one last trick for Ro and smiled to himself. Then he stepped back into the dark castle and moved on to the next part of his plan. For Yu lay in the castle courtyard in terrible pain. His back ached from the fall, and the injuries on his face, arm and shoulder still burned. After a few minutes, he forced himself up and doomed in fury. He could not accept that Shin had cornered him like that, to Ryu. Shin was only a foolish boy who once believed in nice but useless ideals. A weak fool like that should never have been able to push him this far. Ryu convinced himself that it happened only because he had been caught off guard. Since Shin no longer seemed to have true hero power, he swore to kill him next time. As he healed himself with magic, Ryu quickly thought through Shin's likely next move. A boy with almost no magic could not simply escape the kingdom by normal means. That meant he was probably heading for the ritual chamber. Summoning circle was there, and with enough knowledge, it could likely be turned into a transfer circle. For you rushed back into the castle, gathered guards, and headed straight for the ritual chamber. When they arrived, he saw right away that the seal had already been broken. Inside, Shin was calmly waiting in the middle of the room. He no longer looked like the weak hero from before, who was now wearing high-grade magic clothes, carrying a precious sword, and standing among special stones packed with magic power. Ryu instantly understood that Shin had already altered the summoning circle, was using those stones to power it, shouted at Shin to step away from the circle. The knights were confused, especially when Ryu accidentally called him Matsu. Their confusion only got worse when the king entered the chamber with more guards, and demanded to know what was happening. Before you could explain, in a calm and almost friendly tone, he thanked Ryu. He said Russ' help had allowed him to break the seals, and learn how to use the circle. The moment those words left his mouth and every eye in the room turned toward you. Then the circle lit up with a blinding light, just before disappearing. Shin said only one thing he would. She vanished, the room fell silent. The king turned on Ryu and furiously demanded to know what Shin meant by saying Ryu had helped him. Before Ryu could defend himself, another knight rushed in with even worse news. A royal treasury had also been opened, and many treasures were gone. The stolen items included large stocks of magic weapons, enchanted clothes, and even national treasures, such as the anti-magic bracelet and the ring that strengthened spell power. The king's face went pale. These were not minor losses since Ryu had authority over the seals on both the treasury and the ritual chamber. Suspicion naturally fell on it. Desperate to recover the situation, rushed to the circle, and tried to trace where Shin had gone. For a brief moment, he succeeded, and even mocked Shin in his heart for still being too soft. The circle shattered. Only Ryu understood what had happened. Shin had built a self-destruction trap into the circle, so it would break when anyone except him touched it. But to everyone else in the room, it looked like Ryu himself had destroyed it. That was the last blow. The king ordered him arrested. The knights rushed him, pinned him down, and ignored all his desperate excuses. Only then did Ryu fully realize it. Shin had trapped him perfectly. As Ryu screamed in rage, Shin was already far away, quietly laughing to himself. During the transfer, he thought back on the timing. The king's arrival had been perfect. Pretending to speak warmly to Ryu had been disgusting, but it had worked even better than expected. By now, Ryu was likely being blamed for everything. If he ended up in a prison cell, even better. Then the transfer light faded. When Shin opened his eyes, he was standing inside a dark cave. The transfer had worked. Before leaving the castle, he had finished everything he needed there. He had raided the treasury, and took all the equipment with that. He could recover at least part of his combat ability. Looked around and confirmed where he was. This was the Abyss Labyrinth, one of the Dark Being King's major strongholds. It was also one of the dangerous labyrinths Shin had once cleared with his old party. He had come here for one reason: to regain the hero's power. The hero's crest on his arm was still there, but most of its power was asleep. For some reason, the path that let him use it had been blocked. The only way to force it open again was to flood it with an enormous amount of magic. At first, he thought magic stones might be enough, but the amount required was far beyond what he expected. That was why he had come to this labyrinth. At the deepest point of every labyrinth was a labyrinth core, dense mass of magic, that filled the place with the energy used to create monsters. If he could take that core, he might be able to reactivate the crest and reclaim his old strength. As he thought about that goal, old memories returned. He remembered the dream he had once had of ending the war and building a peaceful world where all races could live together. Then he remembered how Lucy, Ryu, and the others had laughed at that dream. Expression hardened. He would make all of them regret it. He stepped deeper into the Abyss Labyrinth. In this world, there were 5 great labyrinths created by the Dark Being King. Each one served as a major base for the Dark Being King's forces, and each was guarded by a powerful commander. The Abyss Labyrinth was one of them, a place filled mainly with earth-based monsters. Shin remembered that it had once had 15 floors. It descended straight downward, and the ground inside was unstable. Strong impacts could easily make the floor collapse, so fighting carelessly. Using magic stones, he cast body enhancement on himself and also used concealment magic to hide his presence. Even so, some monsters still noticed him. A mud ogre charged, but Shine stepped aside and cut off its head with the treasured sword in a single strike. Against lower monsters, body enhancement and sword skill were still enough. His own magic was too weak right now for strong attacks. For now, the sword would remain his main weapon. He ignored the monsters that did not notice him and quickly killed the ones that did. His progress stayed smooth. That changed on the 8th floor. There he found a large cluster of monsters gathered around the stairs. Mud ogres, skeletons, and others rushed him all at once. One by one, they were not a serious problem. The issue was their sheer number. Then a much larger mud ogre appeared. It was a rare intelligent type that could speak. It laughed cruelly and shoved even its own kind aside, treating all the surrounding monsters like worthless trash. When Shin asked if those were not its allies, the monster casually said they did not matter. That answer disgusted him more than he expected. The giant mud ogre attacked. Shin used the soft sword technique, redirecting the monster's strength instead of blocking it head-on. Then, when the creature lost balance, he cut its body cleanly in two. The surrounding monsters froze in fear after seeing their strongest one fall. He reached the 11th floor, but by then the monsters chasing him had increased so much that it looked like a flood of creatures pouring after him. Then another powerful monster appeared ahead. It was a giant earth spider. It fired sticky threads and blocked the path. He took several magic stones at once, overloaded them, and threw them behind him into the pursuing horde. The stones exploded with great force and blew many monsters away. The blast cracked the ground and caused it to collapse. To get away from the spider too, Shin jumped into the collapsing hole himself. He strengthened his body again, kicked off falling rocks and monsters on the way down, and used wind magic to soften his landing. He reached the lower floor safely while the monsters behind him were crushed by the collapse. It was reckless, but it worked. He had now reached the 12th floor. If the old structure still matched his memory, only a few more floors remained. Before moving on, he found a cocoon orb near the... It contained sticky material that might be useful later. As he went deeper, the air grew heavier with magic. At last, he reached the 13th floor. By his memory, the labyrinth core and a neck. Is it transfer circle should both be below. His best plan was to find both, take the core and escape immediately instead of fighting. If things went badly, he could always use the core on the spot and force his power back. But before he could continue, the whole labyrinth shook. At first he thought it was only an earthquake, and then he understood what it really meant. Labyrinth core had already been removed, knew this phenomenon well. Once the core was taken, the labyrinth itself began to destabilize. Someone else had reached the core first and was now fighting the guardian. Shin frowned. He could not let anyone else leave with the very thing he needed. Before he could think further, a giant stone spike burst upward where he had just been standing. He leaped back. The floor cracked and collapsed under him anyway. He fell to the level below. When he landed, he found himself staring at what first looked like a mountain, then it spoke. It was not a mountain. It was a gigantic rock. It spoke. It was not a mountain. It was a gigantic rock dragon, so large, it looked like part of the cavern itself. Shin prepared to retreat through another route, but then a girl's voice shouted from behind the dragon and ordered him to help. He could not see her because the dragon's massive body and the wall were in the way. A moment later, magical attacks exploded against the dragon from behind. That told Shin two things right away. Hidden person was strong enough to injure it, and that hidden person had most likely stolen the core. Once he could not let the core vanish, Shin made a quick choice. We used a magic stone to cast a lightning spell, and spread a net of light across the dragon's face. The attack was not strong, but it worked as a distraction. The dragon slowed for a moment, and in that instant, a small figure slipped through the gap between the dragon and the wall. As she passed him, she grabbed his hand without warning. The dragon roared behind them, and smashed the floor apart with a huge strike. Ground collapsed again, because she was still holding him. Shin reacted a little too late, and both of them fell. Just before he hit the lower floor, something soft caught him. The girl had somehow grabbed him in mid-fall and landed while holding him. Without using visible magic. That alone proved she was no ordinary person. After setting him down, she casually remarked that usually the roles in a rescue like this should have been reversed. Only then did Shin look at her properly, and he froze. Long silver hair, golden eyes, dark being magic, a nearly human figure, but with dark markings on her skin and physical strength far beyond any normal human. He knew her. She was Elphys, the same dark being girl he had fought again and again 30 years ago. Shin remembered her clearly back then. She had possessed power even greater than for heavenly kings. He had fought her before the betrayal, so her face was deeply carved into his memory. The reason she looked unchanged now was probably simple dark being aged. Even so, he had never expected to meet her again here. Elphys looked at him closely as if Shin tensed, wondering if she had already seen through him somehow. Then she asked if he had fallen in love with her at first sight. The question was so absurd that it completely broke his tension. He denied it at once. She looked a little disappointed, which only made him more unsure how to handle her. Shin pushed past that strange mood and asked the question that mattered. Why was she being chased by the Earth Commander if she was a dark being? Elphys answered openly. She admitted she was a dark being and gave her full name. Then she explained that she had already left the dark being king's army and was now treated as an enemy by them. The dragon had recognized her and attacked her as a traitor. That matched what Shin had seen during the chase. She explained that she been trapped in a dead end until he appeared and gave her a chance to escape. Asked who he was. Shin introduced himself and said he had come to the labyrinth for his own reason, and Elphys guessed he was some kind of adventurer rather than a man from the kingdom. He did not correct her. Then he asked if she was the one who had stopped the labyrinth. She said yes, and casually pulled the labyrinth core out from her clothes. The rainbow-colored sphere was unmistakable. That was the very thing Shin had risked everything to get. He immediately began thinking of how to take it from, and to his surprise, she said, simply offered it to him. She said she had gone through the trouble of stealing it, but she personally had no use for it, so she handed it over as if it were nothing special for a moment. Could hardly believe it. Still, the power coming from the sphere was, and stored it in his pouch. Just like that, the item he needed most was now in his hands. After that, Elphys asked if he still had anything left to do in the labyrinth. He answered that all he needed now was a way out. She immediately suggested they cooperate. According to her, the exit transfer circle was on the 14th floor, while they were currently below it on the 15th. She had been trying to reach that exit after taking the core, but the dragon had trapped her before she could get there. She believed the dragon was now waiting near the transfer point for her to return. If they split up and tried to leave separately, it would likely hunt them down one by one. So she proposed a temporary alliance. Shin stayed cautious. He admitted that he could not use attacks strong enough to seriously injure the dragon. Elphys said that was fine. She could still hurt it herself, even though she was unable to use her full power for some reason. All she needed was support and enough time. Shin asked how she could so calmly offer cooperation to a human she had just met. Her answer unsettled him even more. She said he had helped her, and race did not matter. Human or dark being meant nothing to her. On top of that, she said she trusted. Those words stirred something bitter inside him. Lucy had once spoken in a similar way. She had talked about humans and dark being as equals too, and Lucy had betrayed him just like the others, so Shin did not trust Elphys at all. If she was lying, that was fine. He would use her first. If she tried to betray him, he would simply betray her before she had the chance. Even so, he accepted. He agreed to cooperate only until they escaped the labyrinth. Elphys seemed pleased and called it the right choice. As they moved upward together, Shin kept his guard high, but Elphys, as if sensing his tension, casually teased him again about secretly admiring her. He denied it immediately. Even so, he never let his guard down. Soon they reached the 14th floor. The monsters were fewer now, because the labyrinth's power source was gone. Weak monsters were already dying off. That meant the dragon should now be their only enemy. Elphys led him into a large circular chamber. The transfer circle was almost certainly beyond that point. The chamber looked empty, but both of them knew that the dragon was there. Elphys openly called it out and told it to. The ground rippled, then the dragon rose from the center of the room as if the earth itself were liquid. It towered over them, and declared that they had finally come to die. Shin drew his treasured sword and gripped more magic stone. The dragon then fixed its attention on him and promised to make him pay for interfering earlier. That was exactly what Shin wanted. Using what Elphys had told him about the dragon's pride, he directly insulted it. He called it a fool too weak to protect its own labyrinth core. The provocation worked. The dragon trembled with rage and turned all its attention toward him. Elphys quietly reminded him to follow the plan and step back. That meant Shin had to face the Earth Commander alone for the opening stage of the battle. The dragon then announced its name, Balgild the Earth. Commander, it roared at him to be crushed. Shin only narrowed his eyes. Now that the core was safely in his possession, this dragon was simply the last obstacle in his way. The Earth Commander slammed one giant arm into the floor and poured magic into the chamber at once. Every path leading out was sealed shut by stone. There would be no escape. Elphys had already moved to the back of the room. Until her next move, the blast hit the dragon directly, but the stone armor did not crack at all. That much was expected. If his strongest attack could not get through, then nothing else he had right now would in. From the outside still, the dragon was not flawless. Its insides were still vulnerable, and it had one more weak point. Its tail. That part had thinner armor than the rest of the body. If he could cut it off, the dragon's balance would break, and a major opening would appear. The dragon mocked him and called him nothing but a weak human. That arrogance was part of Shin's plan. He ran straight at it. The dragon opened its mouth and fired rock shells like a storm. Shin zigzagged at full speed, dodging one after another, even the near misses battered him with shock and flying stone, but he kept moving. Then he used a wide lightning spell, not to injure the drake, but to blind it for an instant. Lightning spread over its face. The dragon easily brushed it aside, but that small gap was enough. Shin jumped, slipped under its legs, and reached the far side. Now all he had to do was cut the tail, but the dragon, its giant tail came crashing down like a heavy whip. Shin barely avoided it. The blow shattered the ground and sent broken stone flying. He blocked what he could with his sword, but he still lost balance and hit the floor. The tail slammed down again. He forced himself up, dodged, and tried to close in, only for another blow to smash down and send him rolling again. The dragon laughed and taunted him, telling him to aim well if he wanted the tail that badly. Even that was still within Shin's expectation. Then the dragon suddenly noticed something was wrong. Its tail was stuck to the ground. A thick white sticky liquid had spread around it. It was the material from the earth spider cocoon orbs Shin had picked up earlier. While dodging, he had quietly played them exactly where the tail would land. The effect would only hold for a few seconds, but a few seconds were enough. Shin burst forward and swung with everything he had. The treasured sword flashed. It cut through the thinner armor at the base of the tail and severed it. The dragon roared so hard the whole chamber shook, its balance collapsed, and its huge body crashed to the floor with a thunderous impact. Even then, the dragon refused to stay down. Growling in pure rage, it forced itself back up, even without its tail. That was when Elphys finally spoke from behind him. She told Shin he had done enough. She stepped forward while releasing a heavy wave of magic. Her golden eyes turned deep crimson. Then she activated her magic eye. The abyss-like blast of light exploded through the chamber. The Earth Commander took the attack head-on. The power was on a completely different level from anything Shin could use right now. The dragon's massive body was blasted away. Elphys proudly admitted that she had once misjudged this attack so badly that she nearly blew up her own side. For a moment it seemed finished, but then the dragon stood back up. Even after taking that terrifying hit, it was still alive. Worse, its body began to recover the damaged armor. Its injuries and even the lost tail started restoring themselves. Elphys frowned, even she had not expected that. Still, after examining the dragon with her red eyes, she quickly jumbled that it had already spent most of its magic. It might be able to recover once like that, but not many more times, so the path forward was clear. She could kill it with one more magic eye attack. But she needed time to prepare it. Shein agreed to buy that time. Elphys began gathering magic again. The dragon focused entirely on stopping her. It started charging straight toward her. Shin reached for more magic stones and prepared to step in front of it. Then, in that same instant, he noticed something he could not ignore. The dragon's attention was fully locked on Elphys. The route to the exit was still there, only blocked by stone. With enough magic stones and one strong burst, he could probably break through it in seconds. If he abandoned Elphys here, he could live. In his current state, he had no reliable weight to seriously damage the dragon's armor. Even buying time was dangerous, so if he left now, what would really be wrong with that? He took a step. The sound of his foot scraping against the ground echoed behind Elphys. She should have heard it. She should have understood that he might leave her there, but she said nothing. She did not even turn around. She simply kept gathering magic, and left her back wide open, trusting him completely. That silence struck him harder than any accusation could have. He remembered what she had said earlier. Because he had helped her, race did not matter. Human or dark being changed nothing. At the time, he treated those words like, now, with death rushing toward them, she was still acting like she truly believed them. The dragon raised its huge arm and brought it down toward her open back. He leaped forward, grabbed Elphys, and threw both of them out of the way. The giant arm smashed into the floor where she had been standing. Inside his arms, Elphys looked up at him in open surprise. The Earth Commander growled and immediately began charging a more dangerous attack. A terrifying amount of magic gathered inside its mouth. If that blow landed, both of them would die. Shin knew there was still time to run, but that moment had already passed. He told Elphys that he would stop the attack, so she needed to hurry. Then he crushed the labyrinth core in his hand, the moment it broke. A huge flood of magic burst out and rushed into the hero's crest on his right arm. The pressure was so intense that it felt like his body would tear apart from the inside. His vision shook and pain ripped through him. Then he understood the truth. Even a labyrinth core was not enough to fully awaken the crest. The Earth Commander finished charging and laughed, already certain of victory. Shin glared at his own useless arm in fury. He pulled out as many magic stones as he could. Safely hold and forced every bit of magic he had left through his body. If the crest would not open on its own, then he would force it open. He dragged power from every place he could, squeezing out even more from deep inside himself. His right arm burned like fire. Then, at last, something broke loose. A surge of magic rushed into the crest. Shin raised his arm and used the strongest defensive spell he once possessed. A huge shield of light appeared in front of him, nearly as large as the giant stone attack flying toward them. The dragon's strike slammed into it with a crushing roar. The whole chamber shook. The shield bent and cracked under the force, but it held. Shin had blocked it. The dragon froze in disbelief. It quickly tried to switch to smaller attacks, and opened its mouth again to fire rock shells. But Elphys was ready. Her crimson eyes were already fully charged. The dragon sensed the danger and tried to sink into the earth to escape, just as it had before. Elphys' magic eye fired again. A violent red blast struck the dragon while it was only halfway into the ground. The explosion tore through its body, blasted away one arm and left it badly burned. This time, the damage was clearly fatal, and still, the monster refused to fall. Its magic was almost gone, but it forced one more slow healing spell. The wounds began closing again, far more slowly than before, but enough that if they let it continue, the fight could drag on beyond their limit. Elphys admitted she had almost no magic left, so Shin made one final choice. He told her to pour whatever remained into his sword. She did. The treasure sword darkened under the flood of her power, becoming so packed with magic that even looking at it felt dangerous. Shin took it and charged. The Earth Commander swung at him, but now it was desperate and clumsy. He slipped past, jumped onto its injured arm, and ran up along it. Then he brought the darkened sword down into the exposed flesh of its damaged head. The blow cut deep but not deep enough. The dragon jerked its head violently and threw Shin into the air. As he spun above it, the dragon raised another arm to crush him. Then the sword still buried in its head began to shine. This had been part of Shin's plan from the start. If the outer armor could not be broken, then the real attack had to happen from inside. The treasure sword itself contained a great amount of. If that stored power was pushed past its limit, it could be turned into a bomb. With Elphys' remaining magic added on top, it would be enough to kill even this monster. Shin looked down and told the dragon it was over. Then the sword exploded inside its head. A violent burst of magic tore through the inside of its body. The giant body swayed once, then collapsed heavily to the floor. This time it did not move again. Just before Shin hit the ground, Elphys caught him again. Then all strength left his body at once. The battle, the forced use of magic, and the damaged crest all struck him together. As his vision faded, he thought he heard her say something softly. When Shin opened his eyes again, his whole body hurt. Above him was the rocky ceiling of the labyrinth. He was still inside. Then he noticed something else. The place under his head was far too soft and warm to be the ground. He looked up. Elphys was staring down at him. He had been sleeping on her lap. Shin shot upright and shocked Elphys, still sitting calmly, asked why he was so surprised. She pointed out that she could not just leave him there after he passed out. Xin thanked her honest. She immediately told him that he was free to brag to others. That ruined the mood at once. Ignoring that, he checked the hero's crest again. Most of its functions were still sealed, but the labyrinth core had not been wasted. At least now he could draw out a little more of his own magic. He might even be able to use low-level spells without relying on magic stones every single time. Elphys then thanked him for helping defeat the monster. Shin shook his head and said she had saved him more than once during that fight. She brought up the great shield he used against the dragon's killing blow, and admitted that even she had been impressed by it. Then without warning, she asked him if he was Matsu. Shin froze. For one instant, he thought she might attack. He jumped away from her at once and widened the distance between them. From a dark being's point of view, Hero Matsu should have been hated just as much as the Dark Being King was hated among humans. If she knew who he really was, things should have turned hostile immediately. Instead, Elphys only looked confused. She asked if he really thought she would attack him now. Then she pointed out something painfully simple. If she had wanted to hurt him, she had every chance while he was unconscious. Also, her legs had gone numb from holding him there for so long. That was true. She calmly added that she had no reason to fight him anymore. Long ago they were enemies, yes. But now she had already left the Dark Being King's side. When Shin finally asked when she figured it out, she said it was when he used the shield. His magic felt the same as Matsu's. She also said that because his face and body had changed so much, she never noticed earlier. Then, in her usual strange way, she complained that if it really was him, he could have at least greeted her properly. Shin had no idea how to answer that. Elphys then observed that he had become much weaker than before. He admitted that was true and briefly explained that he came to the labyrinth to recover his lost power. The core had helped a little, but not enough. She then asked whether he was still fighting as the hero. Shin answered no. He also told her that, if possible, he wanted her to keep calling him Shin. The name Matsu was already dead to him. That answer seemed to tell her enough. She did not ask further about the old story. Then she asked what he planned to do next. Shin answered carefully. He said he would probably travel through other countries and continue challenging labyrinths the same way he had done here. He did not mention revenge. That was when Elphys smiled. She said it was quite a coincidence, because she also had important business in the labyrinths. Shin sensed trouble at once. He tried to leave the conversation by saying he would go strip useful materials from the dragon's corpse. But Elphys grabbed him with absurd strength and refused to let go. But then she started negotiating in the most ridiculous way possible. First, she proudly declared that in recognition of his performance, she would graciously allow him to accompany her. If he cooked 3 meals a day, Shin refused. She lowered it to 2 meals in nail care. He refused again. She lowered it to 1 meal in nail care. Still no. Elphys looked genuinely shocked that her offers were not working. Shin told her plainly that he had no intention of being dragged around by her outside the labyrinth, so he pulled away and walked over to the dragon corpse. Large monsters always provided valuable materials. Among them was a superb magic crystal. Shin picked it up, ready to store it. Then Elphys suddenly shouted some strange little sound. Effect dashed in, stole the crystal from his hand, and leaped high up the wall where he could not reach. She declared that if he wanted the crystal, little back, he had to come with her. Shin told her to give back. She refused. She did not understand why traveling together was such a problem. Shin finally gave in just enough to say he would listen to her reasons. At once, Elphys happily agreed, but she still did not climb down. When he told her to stop staring at him and get off the wall, she admitted something in a flat, honest voice. She could not get down. Shin could only stare at her. Then she quietly asked him to help. Once Shin finally got her down from the wall, Elphys said something even stranger. She told him that right now, she was only her head. At first, Shin thought she was just being ridiculous again, but she quickly explained. Her real body and her full magic had been split into 5 parts. What stood before him now was only her head attached to a temporary body made from magic. If she let that body go, she would literally become a living head. That image was deeply unpleasant. Elphys explained that her head had been sealed inside the Abyss Labyrinth, and she had escaped only today. The rest of her body had been sealed in the other labyrinths. That was why she had become so weak. To recover her full strength, she needed to gather all the missing parts. Shin then asked the obvious question. Elphys told him the truth. She was the former Dark Being King long ago. Shin had heard that the title of Dark Being King belonged to the strongest Dark Being. When one Dark Being King fell, the victor inherited the position and received a red crest as proof. Elphys showed him the black marks on her body, and explained that they were the remains of her old Dark Being King crest after she lost the throne. She said she had ruled only for a few short years before the name Hero Matsu had spread through the world. Unlike Ortega, she had been a moderate ruler. She had tried to restrain war with humans as much as possible. But that was exactly why war-loving Dark Being hated her. Ortega led a rebellion against her, defeated her, and took the throne for himself. That explained a great deal before Shin's first summoning. Large-scale war had not yet fully exploded. Once Ortega became Dark Being King, everything changed. Elphys continued. After taking power, Ortega held her followers hostage and Elphys continued after taking power. Ortega the Abyss to her followers hostage and forced her to keep fighting for the new Dark Being King. She obeyed only because she wanted a chance to save them and strike back later. That chance never came. Instead, Hero Matsu appeared. Ortega promised that if she killed Matsu, her followers would be freed. She failed. Shin already knew that part from his own side. Then came the part he never knew. After Matsu fell, Lucy and Donas completely switched sides and joined the Dark Being King's army. They dragged the badly injured Elphys before Ortega. There, the current Dark Being King told her she was no longer needed. Then he revealed the truth. Her followers had already been killed long before. Ortega had only kept her fighting by feeding her a lie. Worse, Lucian Donna stood there and laughed at her. They mocked her the same way they had mocked Shin, calling her a fool and a puppet. For the first time, Elphys' calm finally broke. Her voice shook with rage as she remembered it. In that moment, Shin saw how deep her hatred truly ran. Elphys explained that because Dark Being King-class beings did not die easily, Ortega and Lucy took extra measures. Lucy used her power to cut Elphys' body into 5 parts, and those parts along with her magic, were sealed in the 5 great labyrinths so she could never properly revive. That was why she had to travel from Labroth to Labroth now. Little by little, everything around her made sense. He quietly asked if that meant she wanted revenge on Ortega. Elphys began to, then both of them felt it at once danger. Shin threw himself aside just as a spell hit where he had been standing. Heavy footsteps and multiple presences rushed into the chamber. Knights in armor, mages in black robes, all of them carried the kingdom's crest. They had been tracked down. Elphys moved to his side, her eyes already glowing red again. Then the knights and mages split apart, and one man stepped forward through the middle with a wide, ugly smile. Ryu, he laughed and said he was glad he had chased them after all. Then with cruel delight, he greeted Shin by his full current name. The group that entered the Labroth was a royal force led by Ryu. Shin clicked his tongue when he saw them. He had hoped Ryu would still be locked away, but instead the man had cleared enough suspicion to return with a full team. There were 15 knights, 10 mages, and Ryu himself. The moment they noticed Elphys, the knights reacted with, and Ryu himself. The moment they noticed Elphys, the knights reacted with open disgust. They immediately recognized her as a dark being, and began shouting. They demanded to know why the hero was standing beside one. Some even yelled at Shin to kill her on the spot if he still had any pride left as a hero. Where you raised a hand and silenced the noise. He told Shin to return the stolen treasures and magic stones and come back to the kingdom. He even claimed the king was willing to forgive everything if Shin obeyed. Shin answered coldly that there was no chance of that. Ryu only smirked. Then he revealed the true order. If Shin resisted, they were allowed to kill him. Then Ryu made the kind of offer he loved most. He told Shin that if he killed Elphys with his own hands, and surrendered after that, he might be spared. The knights immediately supported the idea and shouted at Shin to prove himself by cutting down the dark being. Shin only looked at them with disgust. He had no reason to kill Elphys. The person he wanted dead was Ryu kept pushing, mocking him for being soft just like before. His voice dripped with the same cheap cruelty as ever. That was when the air changed. A crushing wave of killing intent spread through the chamber. The knights flinched. Even Ryu's stepped. Knights flinched. Even Ryu stepped back. Until then, Elphys had stayed silent. Now she stepped forward and told them to shut their mouths. She said their words were unbearable to hear. Then she glanced at Shin and quietly said, she understood enough now. She had been mocked by dark beings, and he had been spat on by humans in that way they were alike. Shin agreed there was nothing more to say. Ryu's people quickly got ready to attack. Elphys asked if Shin intended to stop her from fighting back. He told her no, but warned her not to kill the man in the middle. Ryu was his prey. With the royal force attacked all at once, the mages had clearly prepared beforehand, because their first volley was strong enough to kill both Shin and Elphys if it landed. But Elphys' eyes turned red, and in the next moment, a magic eye technique crushed every incoming spell into the ground before it could reach them. The attackers froze in shock. Shin did not waste the opening. He threw several magic stones into their formation, and the explosions tore through the front line. Many mages were blown away instantly, along with some of the knights, where you barely managed to shield part of the group, but it was obvious he was slower than he used to be. Shin mocked him for getting weaker. That only made Ro angrier. One knight lost control and charged straight at Shin in a rage. Shin sidestepped him, and used the man's body to block the line of fire from the mages behind him. They were forced to stop their spells to avoid hitting their own ally. In that instant, Shin cut the knight down, and then moved like a shadow into the others, slashing through their ankles and dropping them one after another. As the survivors panicked and focused on Shin, Elphys acted again. The moment he heard it, he jumped aside without hesitation. Crimson eyes flashed, and a devastating magic eye blast tore through the clustered enemies. The remaining knights were wiped out in one strike. The surviving mages completely lost their nerve. Seeing that Shine threw more magic stones into them, Ryu used one terrified mage as a shield and saved himself, but the rest were taken out. In the end, only Ryu remained standing. His confidence was gone. Now it was just the two of them against him. Ryu threw up both hands and tried to surrender. He begged them to stop. claimed he would not attack again and pleaded for mercy. Elphys paused for a moment. The instant she stopped, he tried to launch another fire spell at her, but Shin had already moved, blade flat, and Ryu's right arm was cut off cleanly. For a few seconds Ryu just stared at the severed limb in disbelief. Shin looked at him without mercy, and asked how it felt to lose a right arm. Ryu shouted in rage and pain, but the cut had finally gone through. The sword Shin held now was strong enough to get past the defenses that once stopped an ordinary knight's blade. Then asked Elphys why she had hesitated. She calmly answered, was Shin's so she thought he should be the one to decide his fate. That answer suited him. Ryu, even while writhing in pain, was already healing through the spells built into his body. The self-destruction robe was also still active, which meant Zin still could not kill him yet. Then Ryu tried another trick. This time he turned to Elphys and tried to recruit her, saying she should remember Matsu as the man who defeated her long ago. He revealed Zin's real identity to her, and claimed they should join forces to kill him. Elphys' response was simple. She crushed Ryu's remaining arm with the gravity of her men. The sound of bones breaking filled the chamber, followed by another scream. Then, with calm contempt, she told Shin that he really should choose his companions better. Shin could only admit she was completely right. Ryu, now without both arms, still tried to save face by boasting that he was the strongest mage in the kingdom. Elphys answered with total indifference. She said she did not know or care who he was, but a man like Ryu meant nothing to her. That broke him in a different way. He tried one last threat, promising that he would drag them both to the abyss, but Elphys kicked him in the face and knocked him unconscious. The royal pursuit force was wiped out, only Ryu remained. After the battle, Shin and Elphys examined Ryu's robe. It was a modified version of the special robe, given to royal court mages, but Ryu had filled it with far too many extra spells. Elphys quickly warned that it should not be removed by force. If anyone tried, it would explode. That was not the only problem. Ryu had also layered all kinds of spells into his own body. Even Elphys, who could see and analyze magic better than Shin, said the structure was too tangled to current weakened condition. Shin said it did not matter. Even without removing the robe, he could think of many ways to kill Ryu slowly. Elphys shook her head and told him to look closer. When she showed him the hidden pattern in the robe, Shin finally understood the real danger. The many spells were not just separate protections. Together they formed one larger lost spell. It was a doomed called Causal Funeral. It was a terrible magic that would force everyone responsible for Ryu's death to suffer the same fate as him in simple terms. All of his killers would be dragged down with him. Even Elphys admitted she could not survive that spell in her current state. Shin understood right away that this was not normal modern magic. It had to be one of the lost arts no longer known in the current age. Elphys said the only being she knew who could use something like this was a servant of Ortega called the Reaper. That meant Ryu had somehow gained access to truly dangerous knowledge, and doomed under his breath. Ryu had always been vile, but this was worse than expected. Still, killing Ryu was not his only goal right now. There was something else he needed first. He took out one of the treasures he had stolen from the royal vault. A golden knife called the Golden Blade of Inquiry. It could search the memory of the person it pierced, but only once. After that, its power would disappear forever. Shin decided to use it now. He wanted the truth about the betrayal. He set the knife to search the memory of the betrayal, and stabbed it into the wound where Ryu's lost arm had been. Even unconscious, Ryu screamed as the knife's power activated. Then the memories came flooding in. Shin saw Lucy and Dona's clearly. They were the ones who approached Ryu. They calmly discussed. Lucy promised Rav glory of slaying the Dark Being King if he helped. Donis laughed about how completely Matsu trusted them. Ryu laughed with them, and mocked how easy the hero had been to fool, and felt their emotions too. There was no hesitation in them. They wanted to see his face when he realized he had been tricked. They wanted to enjoy his despair. They had already reduced him from a comrade to a tool. Others joining the plot, human leaders, people he had helped on his journey, people who once said they believed in his doctor, and wanted to support his ideals. Now they were gathered together half smiling, happily discussing how to block the reinforcements and make sure he died. Some openly said they found him annoying. Others said his ideals were dangerous because they could influence more people. All of them agreed. One by one, the people Shin once protected and trusted revealed themselves as traitors. When the memory finally ended, he returned to himself. With wetness on his face, he had been crying. Seeing it with his own eyes was brutal. The voices of those traitors were now burned into his mind. He swore he would kill every single one of them. Ryu, still half conscious and screaming from the pain, only made the moment sweeter. Shin leaned down and told him that he would not die yet. A quick death would not count as revenge. Ryu would be made to regret everything from the bottom of his heart before the end. Then Shin destroyed the severed right arm with a magic stone explosion, so that no healing spell could ever restore it. Ryu stared in horror. Shin told him to spend the time until their next meeting, suffering from the pain of the missing arm. Then he drove the knife deeper into the wound, making Ryu foam at the mouth and pass out again. Even then, the robe's healing magic started closing the wound. It was revolting. Silence returned. Elphys finally asked the question she had been holding back. Was revenge the reason Shin wanted his power back? He told her yes. He explained it plainly. His so-called comrades decided he was no longer needed and tried to kill him. Then he asked her the same thing. If she wanted her strength back, what would she do with it? She said she wanted revenge too. She would kill the dark being who murdered her followers. She would kill the woman who sealed her. She would kill the Oni who laughed at her, and in the end she would kill Ortega himself. Then she said something else. She would become the dark being king again. That was when Shin truly understood. They were the same kind of person now. Former hero, whose dream of peace had died in betrayal. Former dark being king, whose own people turned on her and sealed her away. Their old roles had once been opposites, but their present hatred was almost the same. Elphys stepped forward and offered him her hand once more. She told him that if he helped with her revenge, she would help with it. As long as he remained her ally, she swore she would not betray him. Then, with the full weight of a ruler even in her weakened state, she invited him to come with her. She invited him to come with her. Not as a hero, but as a former hero. Shin looked at that hand for a long moment. He knew now that he could not do everything alone. Trust was impossible, but matching goals and shared interest were enough, so he took her hand. He told the former dark being king that from now on he would rely on her too. After collecting what they needed, they forced open the blocked path and reached the transfer circle. Elphys poured magic into it, and the light of transfer began to rise. Standing together on the circle, Shin looked back one last time at the unconscious Ryu and the others scattered across the chamber. The next moment, he and Elphys vanished from the labyrinth. That was how the journey of the former hero and the former dark being king truly began. A few days after Hero Shin escaped, the capital was still in chaos. Ryu, who survived and finished treatment, was summoned before the king, missing his right arm and still weak on his feet. He faced harsh criticism from nobles who had always wanted him to fall, demanded answers. Ryu answered carefully and hid every detail that would make him look worse. In the end, the king asked the real question. How would Ryu take responsibility? How would Ryu take responsibility? Ryu looked straight at him and said the only answer was for him to personally capture the hero. The meaning was clear. The kingdom no longer had many truly strong people left. Without saying it openly, Ryu made the king understand one thing. The kingdom still needed him. After a long silence, the king gave his order. Ryu would be confined for 10 days. After that, he would go after the hero again. If the hero refused to return, Ryu had permission to kill him. The king wanted the whole matter settled before any other nation learned that a new hero existed. Once Ryu left, some nobles protested that the punishment was too light. The king silenced. Whatever his failures, Ryu had once stood beside the hero as one of the kingdom's greatest names. Executing him would create public backlash the nobles could not control. More importantly, the kingdom still needed his strength, so the matter ended there. Back in his workshop, where Ryu finally let his rage out, he smashed tools and doomed Shin again and again. He swore that next time he would not capture him. He would kill him. He also swore revenge on the silver-haired woman who had looked down on him. To Ryu, it no longer mattered who spoke of justice or revenge. He believed. It no longer mattered who spoke of justice or revenge. He believed those words belonged to him now, so he began laying plans for their deaths. A few hours after leaving the labyrinth, Shin and Elphys were traveling through the forest of algs as they walked. Shin asked again about the terrible doomed on Ryu's robe. Elphys explained that only someone with resistance around the level of the 4 heavenly kings might survive it. Their old selves could have managed it, but not the weakened versions they were now. That led to the real issue: they still needed power. Elphys explained that there were 2 supreme goals in the study of magic. One was lost magic, spells so complex or demanding that people of the current age could no longer properly use them. The other was heart magic, a type of great magic that turned a person's inner self into a unique spell. Shin admitted that both were beyond him. He had relied too heavily on the hero's crest in the past. He could not recreate lost magic like Ryu's doomed, and he had never created a heart magic of his own, so he would have to recover strength through more labyrinth cores. Elphys happily agreed and summed it up in a simple way. They would get stronger and kill every traitor. As evening came, the air grew colder and Shin decided they would camp in the forest for. Elphys looked shocked when she realized there would be no proper bed or pillow. She ignored that and began assigning tasks to his surprise. Elphys worked seriously. She gathered wood and leaves with real effort, and even looked excited by the whole process when Shin asked why she seemed so happy. She explained that she had never camped outside before. Just doing it was new to her. With the help of magic stones, Shin set up a barrier to keep weak beasts and monsters away. They found a clean river nearby, and after some more work they had a rough campsite. Shin muttered that cloth for a better bed would have been nice. Elphys casually asked if he wanted some when he said yes. She pushed her hand into her own head and pulled out 2 cloth sheets. She stared at Elphys calmly explained that she had a storage spell linked to her head, much like Shin's storage pouch, except it connected to a larger hidden space. She also added that if she overfilled it, everything inside could spill out at once. Shin decided he did not want to imagine that too clearly. Later they caught a wild rabbit, gathered fruit, and used river water after boiling it. Even the plates and containers came from Elle, and opened her eyes wide in shock. Then she demanded that he bring out the chef who had made it. When he told her it was him, she looked honestly impressed and happily praised him. She liked the meal so much that she immediately tried to recruit him as her personal chef. He refused. After dinner, Shin tested his magic, thanks to the Labroth core. He could now use some spells without always relying on external magic stones. The results were still far weaker than before, almost crude copies of techniques he once used, but at least some of them were possible again. As they rested, Elphys suddenly spoke more quietly. She said the outside world felt wonderful. Light, sound, wind, and real food were all things she had missed. Inside the seal, there had only been darkness and silence for 30 years. Then she spoke of the memory that haunted her most. She remembered Ortega laughing as he said her followers were already dead. She remembered the dunness mocking her. She remembered Lucy looking down at her while striking her body with a sword. For 30 years, those final images had stayed with her, and the hatred never faded. Shin listened in silence. Elphys then said that calling her by her full name every time was too long. As a special privilege, he could call her Elfie. Shin muttered that she was still as arrogant as ever. She answered that she had once been important enough to deserve it. Soon, Alfie drifted off to sleep. Before long, Shin did too. Several days later, they finally reached the edge of the forest. Beyond it stretched a road leading to a huge volcano and the city built at its foot. That was the allied nation they wanted, and the place where the next labyrinth waited. It was also where one of the traders, Shin saw and Ryu's memory, was now living. The wolf race man who smiled like a decent person and talked about peace. Zin silently promised that he would find him first, and make him the beginning of his revenge. The nation ahead was the Volcania Union, a western land formed by several small countries joining together. It was ruled by a council instead of a single king, and unlike many human kingdoms, it allowed many demi-humans to live openly within its borders. Dark being, however, were another matter. So before entering the city, Shin made Elfie wear the bracelet of disguise, an item that changed the feel of her magic so it seemed human. Without it, she could never walk safely. She could never walk safely through the city once inside. Elfie looked around in surprise, even with a dangerous labyrinth nearby. The city was lively and crowded. The settlement near the volcano was famous as a hot spring city, so it attracted both travelers and adventurers. It also housed an adventurers guild which drew strong fighters from many places. Shin had visited it once 30 years earlier during his old journey, but it had changed so much that he barely recognized it. Now he had two goals here. First, he needed to conquer the next labyrinth and claim its core. Second, he needed to track down the traders living in this city and begin his revenge. He had already told Elfie that one of his targets was here, with her magic eyes. Finding him might be easier, but first, they needed preparation. They entered the district where adventurers gathered weapon shops. Forges and item stores filled the streets. Shin wanted better equipment, especially a new sword forged from the excellent crystal he had taken from the dragon. They entered a large weapon shop. A cat-eared female clerk welcomed them cheerfully and invited them to the counter. When Shin asked about forging a sword from special monster materials, she asked to see the materials first. He turned to Alfie as usual. The awkward task of pulling things out from inside her head felt to her. She calmly reached into that strange storage and started piling the dragon's materials onto the counter. The sight visibly shocked the poor clerk, whose ears stood straight up in alarm. After that, an older man from the forge came out. He looked rough and experienced, and the moment he saw the materials, he immediately recognized them as parts from the Earth Commander. He agreed to forge the sword and asked Shin several questions about his height, build and stance before deciding what kind of blade to make. The old man then told the cat clerk, whose name was Nyan Mel, to go buy extra materials needed for the work. He promised the sword would be finished within a few days, likely before they entered the next labyrinth. Once they left the forge, Shin told Elfie that their next stop was the Adventurers Guild. To enter the next labyrinth legally, they needed to register as adventurers. The guild would also be useful for another reason. It was a place where many people gathered, which meant information moved easily. As they walked through the busy streets, Elfie suddenly stopped and stretched an arm across Shin's path, or perhaps found one of the targets. In a serious voice, she told him to sharpen his senses and pay attention. He followed her gaze and saw several well-equipped adventurers. Standing near a street stall for a moment, he thought she had noticed strong fighters. She was not looking at the adventurers. She was staring at the food stand behind them. It sold the city's famous volcanic grilled dish, meat and fresh vegetables cooked on heated stone. Elfie spoke about it with total focus, as if she were identifying a dangerous enemy. Shin could only stare at her. He had just been dragged into a serious speech about alertness, and all she wanted was street food. When she tried to head for the stall, he grabbed her clothes and stopped her. She looked back with obvious complaint, but he dragged her away anyway. Their first stop would be the guild. The food stand could wait. Adventurers were a special kind of worker in the Union. They were close to mercenaries. The Adventurer Guild gave them dangerous jobs like hunting monsters, killing bandits, and clearing labyrinths. Other nations had discussed creating guilds like this, but for now only the Union had one. To enter the Hellfire Labyrinth, a person had to do two things. They had to join one of the official labyrinth subjugation parties organized on a regular schedule. About 10 minutes after leaving the weapon shop, Shin and Elfie arrived at the guild. The building was much larger than the others nearby. Inside it was wide and noisy. A large board covered with jobs, and a front counter where all kinds of guild work were handled. Rough-looking adventurers filled the place. Elfie looked around and muttered that it was annoying to need guild approval just to enter a labyrinth. Shin told her that it was probably meant to stop weak people from wandering in and dying, even in the past. Plenty of fools treated labyrinths like a test of courage. The moment they stepped inside, the room turned to look at them. Most of the people there were fully grown men with strong builds, so a boy and a girl walking in together stood out right away. Some whispered to each other. One man in full armor looked them over with open annoyance. A few adventurers even looked at Alfie in a way that made their intent obvious. Alfie quietly asked if she should glare back with her magic eyes. Shin told her no. If she did that, someone would probably end up crushed. They went to the registration line on the far right side of the front desk while they waited. Shin listened to the conversations around him. Most of it was ordinary guild talk, but one phrase caught his attention: wolf race. That alone made him listen harder. He also caught a few other scraps. Some people were talking about a mercenary group joining a future subjugation mission. Others were muttering about materials related to labyrinth raids being taken out recently. He could not catch every detail, but the important word was there. Then, he felt it again. Someone was watching him. This was not simple curiosity. It felt like a gaze trying to look inside him. He was about to turn when something bumped into him. He looked back and saw the man in full armor standing there. The man glared at him and told him to go home if he was only playing around. He said adventurers were not some easy game for skinny boys. Shin answered calmly that whether he was fit or not would be decided by the guild test, not by some stranger. The armored man gave a short laugh and said he was looking forward to the exam. Then he walked deeper into the guild. Elfie muttered again about using her magic eyes on him. Shin shut that down. Soon it was their turn at the counter. The receptionist explained the process clearly. Adventurers were people who took guild jobs because of that. The registration. Adventurers were people who took guild jobs because of that. The registration process had only one real test: combat. A guild-approved fighter would face the applicant in battle. The match and the process would be observed, and a judge would decide whether the applicant had enough ability to be accepted. After the explanation, they were sent to the testing hall in the back. There, applicants had to choose either a weapon borrowed from the guild, or to fight only with magic they could use on their own. Magic items and magic stones were forbidden. Shin chose a normal one-handed sword. Elfie chose no weapon at all. The hall was divided so 4 matches could happen at once. Because of that, Shin and Elfie were split up after some waiting. Shin's turn. His opponent was the same armored man from earlier. So the man had not just been a rude bystander. He was one of the guild fighters assigned to the test. The man stepped forward and mocked Shin again. He said that if a thin boy like him wanted to be an adventurer, then he must have a lot of confidence, since that was the case. The man himself would test him. Shin only answered dryly, and walked to the position the judge showed him. The armored man looked like a mage. His style was easy to understand. He covered himself in heavy armor so he could survive close combat, then used magic from inside that shell. The distance between them was not large. If Shin rushed, he could close it quickly, but because the opponent was a mage, the first move would likely still belong to him. The adventurers watching from the side started shouting again. Some asked if the boy was scared. Shin ignored all of them. He had a magic he wanted to test. When the judge gave the signal, both sides moved at once. The armored mage began casting at the same time. Shin released a weakened version of one of his old techniques. In its original form, it was a spell that stole a target's magic, and crushed a spell before it could fully form. Right now, after all his losses, it had become much weaker. Still, it could scatter a target's magic for a brief moment. That was enough. The mage's spell broke apart halfway through. He looked down at his staff in shock, unable to understand why his magic had scattered. Shin was already in front of him. He hooked the man's leg, used the weight of the armor against him, and dragged him to the ground. Then he drove the borrowed sword into the gap at the man's neck, and stopped with the blade pressing against the skin. If it had been a real fight, the man would. If it had been a real fight, the man would already be dead. The whole match ended in about 5 seconds. The judge froze for a moment before finally shouting that it was over. The adventurers who had mocked Shin now stared at him in disbelief. Shin was fairly sure that meant he had done well enough at that same moment. A blast sounded from the next test area when he turned. He saw Elfie's opponent already on the ground unconscious. She stood there with her arms folded, looking like nothing unusual had happened. So she had finished too. The armored man on the floor, or clicked his tongue and told Shin not to get cocky. For a brief moment, the pressure in the man's visible eye changed. It carried something ugly with it. Something that made Shin grip his sword harder without even thinking before he could study it further. The man got up and walked away. Shin watched his back for a moment, then stepped aside for the next match. Later, one of the guild staff told them the final result would be announced the day after tomorrow. If they wanted the answer, they should return then. They left the guild. Immediately said she was hungry. Shin told her they could get food nearby soon enough, but before they had gone far, someone stepped in front of them. Fraceman with an ugly face. He asked if Shin had started getting arrogant just because he won one little test, then he openly insulted him. After that, he looked at Alfie and changed his tone. He asked if she wanted to come with him instead, since a beautiful girl like her would be treated well. Elfie tilted her head and gave him a low answer. Shin grabbed her and started pulling her away. Talking to this kind of man was a waste of time. The wolf seaman reached out to grab Shin's chest. Before Shin could react, another hand caught that arm from the side. Woman with an eye patch stood there. She wore light armor suited for movement, and the way she carried herself made it clear she was used to trouble. She told the wolf seaman to stop causing a scene and said his behavior was pathetic. Some people behind her, likely her companions, told her to back off. She ignored them and kept staring him down. He muttered in irritation and she snapped back that it was her line, not his. After a tense pause, he clicked his tongue and backed off. She didn't thank her. The woman said it was nothing. She simply hated selfish trash like that. Her name it seemed was Misha. Before leaving she warned them, since they were obviously new in town, they should stay away from the wolf race as much as possible. They did whatever they wanted in this city. Elfie asked why the guards did not stop them. Misha started to answer, but one of her companions cut in and said this was not a conversation to have in the middle of the street. So Misha left it there, and only repeated the warning before walking away with her group. After they were gone, Elfie quietly said that the wolf race man should be grateful. Shin asked why. She answered that if the woman had not stepped in, she had been about to break his arm. Shin admitted that was probably true. Then, Elfie went right back to talking about food, especially the famous volcano grilled dip she had wanted earlier. Shin sighed and started after her. That was when he felt it again. Another gaze. This one was different from the earlier one at the guild. It was not probing, it was sharp and openly hostile. He looked around, but the street was crowded with adventurers and travelers. Whatever it was, it meant TR. Shin raised his guard and followed Elfie.